Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. This is the show that, of course, looks at the second Trump administration in depth. We take you through the big news of the week, and we'll take you through it slowly. We'll take you through it, unpacking everything along the way, because it is a lot. There is a lot going on right now. I'm your host, John Stolnis, and joining me this week to help break down everything that happened in the nation's capital. Maybe not everything, but we've selected a few really important things, just the primo stuff here, guys. David Brody, Chief Political Analyst from CBN News. David, thank you for joining me here on the show once again. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, John. I'm glad you selected the primo stuff.
The primo stuff. Yeah, where just the upper echelon, the creme de la creme, as it's called.
Of
And
course.
obviously the topic that is taking up most of the oxygen in the nation's capital this week is Liberation Day. We have been liberated, or at least that is the Trump plan, to be liberated from the shackles of the trade policies that the Trump administration says has put America behind the eight ball for going back decades now. He announced sweeping new tariffs on Wednesday in a ceremony at the Rose Garden at the White House. And according to a chart that the Trump team had at this ceremony, the U.S. will be imposing some pretty significant tariffs on friends and foe alike: a 34% tariff on Chinese imports, 20% on the European Union, 25% on South Korean products, a 24% tariff on Japanese imports, and a 32% tariff on goods coming in from Taiwan. Now, that reciprocal tariff on China of 34% is in addition to a 20% tariff that the country already had placed on them. In all, 65 countries have been hit with tariffs. Cambodia had the highest at 49%, Madagascar 47%, Sri Lanka 44%, and Vietnam at 46%. And David, the way I see it is that there are two major strains here, with strains of conversation with regard to the tariffs: an economic one, and then, of course, there is a political one. Understanding, and I hope the audience does, that neither you nor I have a degree in economics, we are going to try and talk about this a little bit in that vein first. And the first question is, you know, there have been worries now, and we've seen it reflected in the markets with big downturns on Thursday and on Friday after the announcement of the tariffs, that there is worries of a recession being caused by all of this. And of course, the Trump team has been saying we're going to experience a little bit of pain, but the goal here is to bring jobs back to the United States, to make America less dependent on foreign goods, and to even the playing field here. So, in terms of those different kinds of things, what is your confidence level that the economic impact on the country will be less severe than these economists are saying, and that the markets obviously are reflecting so far?
Yeah, it's actually a little bit higher than normal, and here's why. First of all, they call it Liberation Day, but right now it's Trepidation Day. As a matter of
Mhm.
fact, Trepidation days could be
Yeah.
weeks, could be months at this point. They always talk about the short-term gain or short-term pain. Excuse me. Well, it'd be great if someone could define what short-term pain is exactly and how long that will last. And the answer is they can't define it because nobody knows, and that's part of the problem here. That's the trepidation part. But here's why I think it won't be, quote, as bad as people say. And once again, there's many caveats and disclaimers. We're not economists, number one. There's a lot of wild cards at play as well.
Mhm.
So we just don't know exactly what all of the variables will be. But having said that, I think here's what he's really trying to do ultimately. He wants to level the playing field. We know that. But the way he's going about this, John, is I think that before we even get to what everybody's concerned about, which is this global trade war and this escalation, I think what we're going to see is most of these countries come to the bargaining table beforehand, during this time, and say, "Oh, okay, so wait, hold on for a second. You were serious? Okay, so yeah, so let's renegotiate this. That's fine." And then at that point, Trump will come out with a nice little fanfare in the Rose Garden or wherever it will be, and he'll say, "You see, we got them to capitulate. So instead of them charging us X, now they're only going to charge us. They're going to charge us less X, or we're going to charge them more. Whatever the deal is, the point is, it's all the art of the deal." So because of that, I think that before we get to the short-term pain, which may be effectively quickly, during this time, I think we're going to see deals announced with certain countries that are going to dial this back and realize that it's not sustainable for them as a country. And see, because here is Trump's ultimate trump card. Trump's ultimate trump card is my GDP is bigger than your GDP. And he knows it.
Mhm.
So in other words, there could be short-term pain for Americans for sure, but our country will survive. Some of these other countries, it's in jeopardy, or at least their economic viability is in jeopardy. So because of that, Trump knows that eventually they're going to come begging and screaming, begging and kicking, or whatever, screaming, well, all that type of stuff, those
Yeah.
gyrations to the table. I think that's what's going to happen. Of course, the concern, I kind of put China in a separate bracket here, right? I mean, because China's already said, as we know, okay, you want to charge us 34% more, we're going to charge you 34% more, and we're going to ban 11 American companies as well from doing business in China, which is what they said on Friday morning. So the concern is obviously there'll be an escalation between China and the United States. Having said that, I think this will all work out. I think they always say trust the process. I think to a degree, people are saying, let's trust Trump on this. He's a businessman who knows the art of the deal and has really been successful in business. And I think he gets the benefit of the doubt. But the question is, how long does that benefit of the doubt last for? And the truth of the matter is, John, in politics and quite frankly, human nature, we want our food quickly through the drive-through. We don't want to wait 45 minutes. If it's a great steak, maybe. But typically, we don't want to wait for our food. We don't want to wait for this stuff to happen. And I think that's going to be the political aspect of this, clearly.
Yeah, well, and that is the political strain on this. That's the next thing to kind of weave into this, because neither you or I know exactly how the markets are going to react. Certainly, people are, and this is, I'm all about going for the joke, so I hope everybody understands where this is coming from. But the joke is, by the critics, the only thing being liberated right now is people's retirement money, right? The 401ks are getting hit pretty hard right now. And again, when you're talking about the stock market, you're obviously looking at more long term. You're not looking, if you're judging the stock market day by day and those wild swings, it literally will drive you crazy and really cause you to worry. And certainly there's a lot of trepidation based on that. But one of the things that we talked about during the campaign and during the first couple months of these tariffs before this big announcement was the president losing the forest for the trees. The administration understanding that one of the reasons they were elected was because of high prices and the concerns that people had about inflation. And one of the reasons the Biden administration, the Biden campaign, and then the Harris campaign failed was because they didn't adequately address the concerns of the American voters, the American people, and their concerns over high prices. Even polls out this week show that high prices, inflation is still the number one concern among the American people, among the American voter. And the message from the Trump administration right now, David, is trust us. Things may get worse before they get better, but trust us. They have more time to allow that to happen, right? Harris and Biden didn't have that kind of time. That was a campaign. The election's coming in a couple of months. Trump has a few years before, at least on the presidential part of it, that another election begins. But there are midterms that are coming, that, people are going to start running for midterms in the next few months or so. I guess the question is, how patient do you think the American people will be? They weren't very patient last year.
Not very patient. And there's a mandate for sure. But what is the mandate for? This is where it gets a little confusing, John. So hear me out. So the Trump campaign at the time said he was very clear that tariffs are a beautiful word. I love tariffs. We're going to do tariffs. So the mandate, so to speak, people voted knowing that Trump was probably going to go down this road. They also voted for what Trump was saying, which is, I'm going to lower prices. Oh, okay. So wait a minute. So we got lower prices, but we got tariffs. So that could translate to higher prices. So how is that going to work exactly? So in other words, the Trump administration right now is saying, look, he told you he was going to do tariffs. So the American people voted for this. Okay. Yeah, but they also voted for lower prices, so to speak, if you will. And so I think that's kind of the confusion here. Or not the confusion, but the dilemma.
Yeah.
Here's one last point, which I think is important. And he won't get the credit for it now. And I get that because it's in the middle of the minutia going on. But let's be clear, and help me if I'm wrong here, John, but I don't think I am, as I pat myself on the back, which is simply that this is bold by Trump. He didn't have to do this.
Yeah.
He didn't have to do tariffs. He could have just waited for the big, beautiful bill, done the tax cuts, and just kind of rode off into the sunset, if you will. But he is fundamentally trying to change the way the United States does business. Now, you might hate him, you might love him, but either way, you got to give him some credit for taking a risk here, because this is a political risk. It's a potential legacy risk here as well. Because if this thing backfires, I mean, it's going to go down in history as one of the biggest colossal mistakes in American history.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, I said either way, you got to give him credit. Whether it fails or it succeeds, he took the risk, and he didn't have to take the risk. He could have easily just mailed it in like all the other presidents did before and just went with free trade and did it. So, but the thing is with Trump, he's a man of action, whether you like it or not. And the truth of the matter is, he's not just been talking about tariffs on the campaign. He's been talking about this since Oprah in 1984, if you look at the clips. I mean, he has been consistent on this for about 50 years. And he finally had the chance in a second term to do it, and he's doing it. So he really believes in this. He really does, John.
Yeah, and this is an attempt to kind of go back in time. It seems,
Yes.
to and we'll see whether or not the global economy, which has changed so much
Yeah.
over these last 30 years, whether it can go back in time, whether they're, and I think one of the issues that was raised that I thought was interesting. I heard on another show it's falling right out of my head right now, but
Mhm.
the opportunity for corruption here, with regard to tariffs. And if you're cutting a lot of deals with individual, not just countries, but companies, you can
Mhm.
have some companies that look for carve outs around some of these tariffs. And they're part of what I think had people getting away from tariffs back, and even like the late 1800s, early 1900s, was that there was a lot of corruption around these countries,
Mhm.
going to members of Congress and carving out exceptions, and the grift that can go on with that kind of thing as well. And so one of the things that that MAGA supporters, that Trump supporters have really been furious about, and one of the reasons for Elon Musk's Doge committee is to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. And so I'm curious what you think about that possibility, and how adamant the Trump administration needs to be to tell people, listen, that you've got to follow my lead on this here. No deals, no side cutting around, these different tariffs. This is for the American people as a whole. This is for the greater good of the country moving forward.
Now they have to be very adamant on that for sure, and I think they will. But you raise up the historical aspect of all of this, and that's important because you heard Trump talk in the Rose Garden, and I've done some research on it because I wasn't alive in the 1800s. I did consult with Biden, who apparently was. Just kidding. I'm sorry, I had to go
That's
there.
too easy, David.
It's a softball. It's my bad. It's my bad. It's terrible. You know what? I'll repent later. But look, starting what was it, in the late 1700s, 1789, I believe, all the way through 1913, this country was run on tariffs. In essence, 90% of the United States income coming in was on tariffs. It wasn't until the federal income tax in 1913 that all changed, and tariffs kind of, to a degree, went away. They tried to bring back tariffs in 1929 with the Smoot-Hawley Act, but that didn't work out too well. Historians would suggest that led to, at least, I shouldn't say led to the Great Depression, but at least was part of the reason for the longevity of the
Mhm.
Great Depression. So the reason when you brought up history, it made me think about how this is not apples and oranges. A lot of people will say, well, we ran on tariffs back in the day. Okay, yes, but our government wasn't as big. It's
Right.
much different today. We are giving out benefits up the quote proverbial yin yang, and I think that's
Mhm.
hyphenated, yin hyphen yang, because that's the truth. I mean, that's what we're doing. So this idea that you can just kind of run back on tariffs again, because Trump ultimately, I think in pie in the sky utopia land, would love to eliminate the federal income tax, which not going to happen, or at least there's no reason for it to happen at this point now. Like there's no movement for it,
Right.
even though Trump wants to do it. But you can't do that. So all that to simply say we're in a whole new world, as Aladdin would like to say. I don't know if Aladdin actually said that, but now I'm sorry, I'm digressing. Now I have to go watch a Disney musical. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, we got an Aladdin reference in, so we've
Yes.
already won the day here on this
Not often.
edition.
Not often you get an Aladdin reference on this podcast.
That's right. The last thing on this, and again, from a political aspect, the role of Congress with regard to the tariffs.
Yeah.
Republican Senator Chuck Grassley is introducing a bill along with Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell
Mm.
to allow Congress to regain control, or at least some measure of control over the imposition of new tariffs. And essentially, Congress would need to approve tariffs
Mhm.
uh, in order for them to go into effect. They were trying to take a little bit of this back, act as a little bit of a stopgap against an executive decision like the one we've seen from Donald Trump here. They're
Mhm.
also trying to get a reconciliation bill done. They're part of what I remember Tommy Tuberville said this week,
Mhm.
that let Trump handle the tariffs. We handle the tax cuts. They want to help the American people pay for maybe some of the higher prices of things that might be coming down the pike by giving them back some of the money, that they've paid in taxes,
Mhm.
by putting in tax cuts. Correct. And if I'm wrong about this, please tell me. But it sounds similar. Like we want to fight the impending inflation that we think might be coming by giving out checks to the American people. And I'm never against getting a check from the government and getting more of my money back. But that was kind of the criticism that I think we saw Republicans levy against the Biden administration during the pandemic. And one of the reasons that I think people were saying that inflation grew much higher and lasted a lot longer than it ordinarily might have. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great point. I mean, fiscally, fiscal policy wise, it doesn't quite jive for sure. Having said that, from a PR standpoint, who doesn't like to get a check in the mail, so to speak? And you can make the argument that after all of the quote pain and suffering and the short term pain regarding prices, that the White House can come out and say, "Listen, we hear you. Here's $5,000 to
Mhm.
make up for it." I mean, so I mean, politically it makes sense. Economically, maybe not so much. In terms of the first part of the question, John, you mentioned Congress getting back in the game. Well, they might want to check the Smoot-Hawley Act in 1929. They passed the Smoot-Hawley Act in
Yeah.
1929, and wait for it, did not go well. And so 5 years later, in 1934, what happened? Well, it turned out that they gave the executive, the president of the United States, power to unilaterally, if I can say that, control tariffs 5 years later. And so that's where it stood. So, in other words, Congress had the power. They gave it up. They relinquished it to the president of the United States in 1934, hashtag FDR. And the rest is history. So, this idea of you're going to put the genie back in the bottle and all of a sudden say Congress is going to regulate tariffs, not going to happen.
Well, we'll see how this plays out, obviously,
Yeah.
over the next week, and I'm sure we'll probably be talking about this on the next episode of Navigating Trump 2.0. I do want to switch gears and talk a little bit about a little bit of history that we saw on the Senate floor this week. New Jersey Democrat Cory Booker set a new record for the longest floor speech in Senate history. Over 25 hours, this man stood at a podium and said words out loud, which is just for two people who talk for a living. I don't know if you can comprehend talking for 25 hours straight.
Mm.
Apparently, he had 15 binders worth of material to reference and go back to if he needed to, in order to give him the hashtag content that he needed in order to get this done. But what we're seeing is the reaction from the Democratic Party, and that's the more interesting part of this. Is Democrats have been down on themselves, and rightfully so, over how they have been responding to the different things that we've seen from the Trump administration during his first few months in office. And one of the rallying cries we've seen was finally someone showing some fight. That's kind of
Mhm.
that's the sentiment that I've seen most often with regard to Cory Booker's speech on the Senate floor. What did you think of what Senator Booker had to say? I mean, he was there to rail against the Trump administration's policies and to fight for Democratic Party principles and ideals. Was this a rallying cry for Democrats? Do you see it as a template for them in some way moving forward? Did it give them the shot in the arm that they need?
Well, let's start with this. Normally, people don't announce their presidential aspirations till 2 years into a presidential into a presidential term. After the midterms. But Cory Booker has officially now, with that 25 hours, put his name at the top of the Democrat leaderboard. That's the truth. And this was an audition to run for president of the United States. At first, I thought, maybe it's just to get Schumer, out and kind of take advantage of that. No, I don't think so. I think it's much bigger than that. I think Cory Booker knows that there is a vacuum at the top of the Democrat Party because, AOC, I don't think so right now, at least. I think it's more like she'll probably run for senator against Schumer. I see that, but not for president. Bernie Sanders, he's like 117. He looks like someone from Back to the Future and he needs a haircut. But beyond all of that, who else is there? I mean, yeah, JB Pritzker and Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom. Yeah, they'll all be in the mix, but Cory Booker wants in the mix too. And so this is what that was all about. And he comes along at a perfect time. You're right, John, that the Democrats want to see fight. And let's give Cory Booker credit. I mean, 25 hours. I mean, my goodness, I can't go an hour without something to eat. And not only did he not have anything to eat or drink, he couldn't sit down. Now, to me, that's the biggest thing. I mean, I would have been a viral video. I literally would have collapsed into like a ball of flesh, and a lot of flesh if it were me. So, kudos to him. He did the right thing. By the way, I truly believe he believes all of that. I think he's totally authentic. I mean, he can't stand what Trump's doing. So I don't think it was an act or a show. I just think it was from the heart. But at the same time, he knew politically that this would be a good situation for him. So it was kind of double duty. Now, having said, we can talk about the merits of what he said, because he was saying a lot of stuff that was a little bit, out there and needed a few fact checks, more than a few fact checks. But that's a kind of a separate topic.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I certainly think he was planting his flag in the presidential field
100%.
for 2028. There's no doubt about it. And you have to. I imagine he had to work out a little bit, to kind of get ready for that. Like I think I read he didn't eat for a couple of days. I think you just said that. Like he didn't have anything to drink because, it's I don't, and how you talk without filling yourself up with lots of water during the course of doing that, well, then there's obviously a corresponding, move after that. And he couldn't do that if he wanted to talk for 25 straight hours. That's just, it is mind boggling. And given that I did see that Governor Whitmer had a major speech in Washington this week where she was talking about foreign policy and economics. And that to me also seemed like she's starting to kind of put her feelers out there. Why would the Michigan governor be in Washington, D.C. for a speech of that kind of scope if it wasn't also to just kind of, glad hand and put your name out there and show that you have a breadth of knowledge beyond just your own state if you're planning on taking that next step. So we may be already seeing, David, the first couple steps of the 2028 presidential race.
We are. You mentioned Gretchen Whitmer there in D.C., and don't forget, she has been very clear about saying, quote, she wants to work, I'm paraphrasing, but wanting to work with the Trump administration where she can. I mean, she understands that they lost Michigan and they have to do something different. So she's there. And then you have Gavin Newsom, right? He's on he's on that tour with interviewing every single conservative under the sun. No one believes it, by the way, in conservative circles. I mean, the fact that you're going to talk to Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk, everybody will like, kudos to him for having these conversations. Okay, let's hold off for a second. Okay, this is all smoke and mirrors. This is all, and people are very upset at Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon for even participating in this because they know that this is just a means to an end for Gavin Newsom. That this is just he's going to then go far to the left in the Democrat primary and then come back in the general if he ever made it that far. So he's going to go. So he started on the left. He's coming to the right. Then he's going to go back to the left. Then he's going to go to the right. That's a lot of square dancing, John.
Very well said. Last thing for this episode, David, and that is Elon Musk's future.
Yeah.
Reports this week indicated that President Trump was telling members of his cabinet and other members of the inner circle that Elon Musk's work is nearly complete, that his time as part of the inner circle at the White House and in the administration here in Washington, D.C. is nearing an end. Now, the White House did push back on that pretty strongly this week. So I'm not sure exactly what to make of this story, but it comes as Musk, in Wisconsin, at least this week, did not appear to be a force multiplier for Republicans there. There was, of course, that big Supreme Court battle, that seat for that would swing the direction of the court progressive or conservative. It's been 4-3 leaning to the left for a while, but there was a real chance that it could have swung to the right. And a special election that was held on Tuesday, Musk appeared there a couple days before the election, and the Democrat won. So a lot of people have been seeing this as, especially in swing states, Elon Musk is not very popular politically. And certainly there's a large portion of those in Washington, D.C. That don't like what he's been doing either. What do you think Elon's future is in the administration? Is his time running short?
Yes, 100%. Look, here's the deal. He's got 130 days, 130 days. That's his special government employee status, right? Trump could renew it if he wanted to, but I think that's going to be the end of it. 130 days, which comes up, I believe, in May, if I'm not mistaken. It might be earlier than that. I have to check my math on it, but it's coming up pretty soon. So I think the story overall is pretty accurate, maybe not specifically as it relates to some of the details in that story. But yeah, I think he'll be gone right at that 130-day mark. But what does gone mean? JD Vance the other day said he's still going to be an advisor to the president, a friend. He'll have walk-in privileges at the Oval Office. And, look, he'll be on the phone all the time with Trump. I just don't think he'll be as visible. I think that's what this is really about. And why exactly? Why wouldn't he be as visible? Look, here's the truth of the matter. And I want to do a disclaimer because I know there'll be a lot of folks that'll say Elon Musk is doing great work, and he is. I mean, when I say doing great work, I mean, for someone to come in and really try to look at this and try to figure out where the waste, fraud, and abuse is, that's great. But at some point, you become a political viability, or excuse me, a political distraction. And you become a liability, I should say, political liability. And I think he's approaching that for this administration. He had gotten out in front on some stuff. For example, he talked about how it's important to cut entitlements. That's where the real money is. $1 trillion. You got to get after entitlements. It's like, whoa, hold on. That's not what President Trump was saying. And that led to more articles about, well, are you going to cut Medicare and Social Security? So, I mean, there's things like that. Plus, you got to remember, Elon Musk, as we know, John, is a free speech absolutist. Well, okay, so we think, rah, rah, free speech absolutist. By the way, I believe in being a free speech absolutist. Don't get me wrong. But with that comes a bit of a rebel streak, right? In other words, you're going to just let it rip. And that's what Elon Musk does. He's got power. He's got money. That's what I've heard, at least money, a lot of it. And now he has a social media platform. You put all three of those together, plus you're a free speech absolutist that just lets it roll because you're a rebel. That is potentially toxic because you're just going to do and say whatever you kind of want. And that's what he's done. And plus he's a bit, how do I call it? Eclectic. He's got a personality that's, interesting to say the least. And the truth of the matter is I've been in Washington a long time, maybe far too long, actually, John. And I know how this town works. Power, jealousy, covetousness. That's the truth. And you have cabinet secretaries and others that are saying, hold on, slow your roll, Elon Musk. Are you running this cabinet or am I running this cabinet? Is your Doge team? Because remember, Doge goes out on social media and says, we did this, we cut this, we did that. Look at our website. Well, wait a minute. Are you doing it or are you recommending it to the appropriate cabinet level secretary?
Right.
I just talked to Secretary Doug Collins at the VA. I asked him point blank. I said, who's running the show? I mean, is it you that's making these? He goes, it's me entirely. I'm making the decisions. And he was very forceful on that. The point is that the truth of the matter is, if we put a truth serum in Washington, and there'd be a lot of truth serum to go around because we need that. The truth of the matter is, they would tell you that indeed Elon needs to just pull back a little bit. So I think that's part of the pushback that we're seeing. I think so.
There's not enough truth serum made in the world to supply what would be needed in the nation's capital, David. That's just well, our truth serum here is that we love bringing the show to you each and every week. That'll do it for this edition, however, of Navigating Trump 2.0. We will be back next week to help break down everything that happened in Washington, D.C. through the lens of the second Trump administration. David, thank you so much for joining me today.
John, great to see you.